Welcome back to Ozark Garage. Today we're working on the Suzuki DRZ 400. I've had this bike now for a couple months and I've been riding around a bunch, and it's got a problem, and that problem is the front end tends to wobble at higher speeds. So anything over 70 miles an hour or even lower speeds, if you get hit with a gust of wind or passed by a semi, gets some wobble on the front end. It's not terribly uncommon with these bikes, especially with worn tires, worn knobby tires in the front like these Dunlops, or if you've got too much weight in the rear. And so we're going to fix that by putting on this Scott steering damper. So I'm going to show you how to install it today. This is a weld-on version, and I'll explain why I went with the weld-on version here in a little bit. But first things first, we got to remove the seat and the tank. So the first thing we're going to install is a new top clamp for the bars here, and this is what actually mounts the steering stabilizer unit to the bars. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a quick Sharpie mark here to make sure I get these bars back in the correct location when I replace the top clamp with this one. So previously the arm was located this way, and that required the steering damper to mount up here, which it hit my stock gauge cluster. So I don't know if I ordered the wrong part or what, but I flipped it around like the instructions say you can do, and now it will go on in the upside down position like this, not hit anything, and the lever arm will extend down here like it's supposed to. All right, so I've got the Scott steering stabilizer temporarily installed on the clamp here, and this is what attaches it to the frame. So this stays stationary while the forks can steer, and then the steering dampener acts upon this to dampen it. This is the weld-on one, and I bought the weld-on one for a couple reasons. So number one, it's about 75 bucks cheaper than the clamp-on one, and number two is the way this is welded here, the clamp has to clamp onto this round upper bearing, and I'd have to grind into this weld anyway to get that to clamp up there. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this off with the sanding disc and then get this mocked up and tacked in. The frame bracket needs to be shortened because it has to fit between the frame and the steering damper arm itself. So contouring the bottom helps it fit on the frame better, and then I had to cut down the upper tube because I need room for the black bushing that you see in the next shot right there. And then also the pivoting bushing has to fit front to back in the slot on the arm, if that makes sense. So here's the final fit I ended up with. It's very much parallel to the triple clamp. You can see there's some clearance for the black bushing up top, and it's also centered front to back in the arm. All of this is very, very important to prevent binding and make sure you have a full range of motion with the steering. To protect the bearings, the paint, and the oil in the tank below, I'm going to use some heat-absorbing paste. So this is some pretty cool stuff if you've never used it before. All you have to do is slather it on around the area you're welding and the area you want to protect. Make a complete ring, and it really blocks the heat from going outside that ring. After I check for clearance left and right, and then for any kind of binding, I'll go ahead and remove the steering damper and fully weld the bracket to the frame. The heat-absorbing paste also removes pretty easily with some soapy water when you're done. Here I'm just brushing on some silver paint I had lying around just to keep it from rusting. It matches the bracket pretty well, but not the frame so much. This pin needs to be greased into the sleeve just to keep it from binding and seizing up. Now we can install the Scott steering damper and check for any binding, and the final installation is done. While I had everything apart, one other thing I decided to do was install a USB power outlet. And so this is a 3D printed bracket that I got off of Thingiverse, and it relocates the ignition switch off of the handlebars themselves, and also will hold a 12-volt outlet. It mounts directly to the factory gauge pod right next to the indicator lights. And once again, this came off Thingiverse, so look it up if you have a DRZ 400 and want to install one. All you need is a couple longer screws, and it'll mount up. These two wires are unused from the factory, and they are in the instrument panel area of the DRZ 400. It's pretty common to wire up an outlet to these, so I just followed suit, adding an inline fuse. The USB outlet I chose also has a voltage gauge, which is pretty handy to have, and will let me know if my stator ever starts to go out and I need to replace it. Here you can see the finished install, along with the finished Scott steering damper. Only thing left to do is to reassemble the bike and take it for a test ride. So here we are a few months later, and I've ridden the bike a bunch with the Scott steering damper installed. And really, it did everything I wanted it to do. It solved my death wobble issue, especially on bumpy roads and anytime it was windy and gusty. Here on this ride, it's probably hard to tell, but it is pretty gusty. And used to be, anytime you got a hard crosswind gust, or if you're kind of riding in the dirty, turbulent air behind a truck, the front steering would start to shake. Or anytime over, say, 70 miles an hour, it would also shake. And really, the Scott steering damper, you can adjust it high enough or low enough that you want, and it works great. I also had the opportunity to take the DRZ to Colorado and run it on some of the miners' loop trails. And this is a great use case for the steering damper also, because if you hit big rocks with the front suspension, sometimes instead of rolling over them, it can try to jerk the handlebars left or right. So a lot of people use them for off-road use also. And I saw a lot of these in use in Moab earlier this year also, which is kind of what sold me. So if you want to see more of this video from Colorado, including the Trail 125 out here on the Miners Loop, I'll put a link in the upper right-hand corner, so be sure to check that out. Otherwise, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.